The F and the 1 and C.
Huh?
The F and then the 1 and C.
Yeah. And it's all set.
Oh, you sent it?
Yeah. Oh, I believe I just sent it. Yeah.
And the new cards are on the 1 and C?
What?
The new cards are on the 1 and C?
Yeah.
Wait, the new cards are on the 1 and C.
Okay. I'll just start by going over the app. I want to start with the second advantage to talk about this open markets idea. The reason we talk about the open markets idea is the concept and the conception of what happens when we pass the affirmative, what happens when the state decides to take negative state action to actually withhold what it's doing in terms of persecution and enforcement of marijuana prohibition. The idea being that what's happened since marijuana has been prohibited starting in like the 1930s, there's been a push towards black market and illegal market, the market that operates outside of the state, which we see as resembling what Hayek referred to as almost like the dream market, laissez aller. It's like the concept of a market that really shows what reality is for this one unique instance of what is happening in terms, at least in this term, of marijuana production and sales and everything else. The cards we use, the competent evidence, go into specifically how this functions as, like, they shouldn't say survival strategy, but more so it functions as something that's been theorized since the 1930s, actually since Adam Smith, talking about what the market really is about and how, like, what the state has done by trying to create something that is legal and saying that we are going to have nothing to do with except for persecution. It has created a different kind of market entirely that has naturally creates this a benefit which goes into the interactions of person to person, something that doesn't have to do with trying to control and regulate how life and everything is supposed to be, how it actually comes down to the individual character and the person-to-person relationships that happen in that way, especially when it comes to regards to trading, which means that you can open up the ground for what it is to interact and be part of whatever your micro economy really is, your micro market. And the market of, or the lens of understanding what markets are is actually what we go into, saying we don't understand what happens in terms of marijuana because of the constant prohibition. But what we've seen is that something has evolved outside of it that is beyond what the state tries to stick its nose into, which is worthwhile at looking at, and more so it promotes this concept of individualism, like almost a radical autonomy in terms of what can be done from the person, and then how the lack of state engagement anywhere else has created a kind of benefit in terms of surviving while still being part of an inescapable reality. The fun part of it is that, or not the fun part of it, the fun part of the affirmative, the plain text itself, is just saying that, like, instead of creating the one single risk that goes into this market, which is the persecution, there's none. And that opens up something that has never really existed in the world, and it would be fascinating and fun to find. And one of our evidence goes into how a lot of our war on drugs and the reasoning behind the war on drugs, the syntax, and everything else go. Specifically in this line of, it's created this kind of market that we've never really seen before that is absolutely fascinating. And what would it be like if there was no form of persecution for just engaging with that market specifically? The other side of it, which we got into for the thing that happened right after the war on drugs advantage, and the war on drugs advantage just goes into how incarceration is constantly happening now, which is why it necessitates the affirmative to go into what state action needs to be, saying that role playing, and more so it's like taking into consideration what the state needs to do is very important. Our general concept is that the state mostly listens to only the state. Like it's this problem of us being tiny ants in an anthill, not having any control of how the operational functions are, and more than that, like being subject to the fact that control is the one thing that is always sought. Through this line of reasoning, we've realized that if there's something we can do through the magic of debate and talking about just random real-world examples and things that we can push and pursue in terms of possible policy forms, especially when it comes to the actions of the state, that if the state is going to listen to itself, the state needs to realize it's been sticking its nose in for too long. And more than that, it just takes negative, like the negative state action which we imply is the only way to create that kind of solace, because it's the only one that will make effective pragmatic change. And so we isolate the reality that the state is the perpetrator of this. Going on to the 1NC, I'm working with the functional reality that the performance was like concept to reshape politics, to say these things, to like accept what commodification has been and everything else. But the trouble is that it doesn't go into what we would like political potency. So if we think about how it's supposed to reshape politics, it comes up lacking. So from Rothberg and Bounty in '97, the recent vogue of performativity suggests the desire for political potency is replaced by the demand for critical rigor, the appreciation of performativity as for purposes in which we completely unsuited as misdirected crucial activist energies are also squandered, resourcing and even endangering those of the naive enough to act on the performativity of these false political promises, a reasonable and expected way of practical political discourse to essay and analysis which links to its proposed action with the supposed effects of praising the fruits of specific political labor before the seeds of their sown. Only by means of such assertions can a political program be persuaded to undertake some tasks and forego others. More so, the performative pedagogy fails to contextualize the competitive debate, and there is no rigorous criteria for deciding whether or not we have sufficiently performed our pedagogy, created that kind of knowledge production. And Dina and Perry 2011, our endeavor to write about the embodiment fails before it begins, since the body is impenetrable. We look at the endeavor. The endeavor to talk about the body is also challenging, not futile. The discourse is also directing to the dominant discourse of the mind. The educational research and discursive material disinfecting, the cleansing takes place, the transportation of the body in the space of written individual text. The negative performance is co-opted by the elite tool of immiseration, evaluating debaters as their speakers as if everyone who exists within this space is anonymous. This is Ziev 98. Here's Ziev. The consensus reached by the reflective subject taking part of the dialogue also about the critical pedagogy tonight, especially in the limits and the light of the declared anti-intellectualism on the hand of the profound glorification of feelings, experience, and self-evident knowledge upon groups of others. Marginalized knowledge is knowledge portrayed by the relevant legitimacy of superior alternatives to hegemonic education. Truth is replaced by knowledge of the supreme criterion of the self-evident, namely the potential productivity of the creative violence and dialogue with their own adorers of difference to take part in the implicity of represented as one of the desired production of violence. The marginalization and repressed self-evident knowledge is no superior or the self-evident knowledge of relying on the knowledge of marginalized groups is no less naive and dangerous than relying on the hegemonic knowledge, and because of this critique of Western foundationalism, the ethnocentralism declines to uncritical acceptance of marginalized knowledge, which becomes the foundationalistic and ethnocentric presentation of the truth, the facts, or the real interests of the group, which go more into what the function of a larger scheme of this kind of performance and pedagogy is supposed to be, but what we find through the 1NC and just the articulation of what happens in the 1NC, particularly what the message of the song truly goes into, which I am very intrigued by, I guess, is on this idea that the silence is necessary, that silence is always going to be there, and silence is the thing that can be controlled. And the idea, if this is what the knowledge creation is supposed to be, which would be a fascinating, like me knowing right off the bat, but more so, if this is what the pedagogy, if this is what we like to gain and understand from this, that to tear away people's dreams, to do nothing until heard by someone else, to always be waiting, to be on this pause, to never be going, and to have that be the indefinite truth is kind of against what allowing the world to be malleable to our own hands kind of goes into. When we talk about the affirmative, we have this idealism, this radical autonomy, this conception of what can be done with our own hands, what is possible to change, what we can create for the sake of the creation because we are doing such things. And the conception that we're kind of led to believe as relaxing and honestly needed as it is to not, and to allow the not doing to be the thing that overcomes all. And what we find is that it doesn't go for creating the kind of change or even the kind of knowledge that would allow us to be intrinsically better off. That's fine.
Yeah, are you ready for
Yeah.
comments? Sorry. What is the next applicant?
Honestly, we just think the neg comes up lacking and doesn't really disprove the necessity of the affirmative plan. It's not about
It's
being
lacking
bad.
in what?
Lacking of engagement, lacking of.
Does the net do anything?
I kind of thought the net is, I analyzed the song because it was something to do. I drew some nice pictures of trombones and things that I enjoyed.
Was that productive?
That really is dependent on what productivity means.
Wasn't productive for debate?
Or debate,
Yeah.
according to most of the authors we cite now.
Like, what is a performance?
Performance usually is just every speech, what we encounter, what we go
So,
through.
if it's every speech, then why isn't the performance debate a wash?
What do you mean, why is it?
Like,
a
did
wash?
you perform by speaking?
Technically.
Yeah, so, okay. So what are you doing with the app?
What are we doing with the app?
Yeah.
And out of just the sake of specificity, like personally what am I doing with the app, or what does the app do?
What does it do for debate? What does it do for anything?
It allows us to go into a different kind of thinking about perhaps what is the lens of the market, what is like the economic function of market that has not been controlled or touched by the government aside from in persecutory forms. And
If
lets us
the government
question what
shouldn't
the change
stick
should
its
be.
nose in things, why are you sticking your nose
In
in
the
things with your
government?
plan? Through legalization.
It's a different conception of legalization. It's the first.
Who's doing the legalization?
The state has to be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
in
you're
all
s-
these instances, yes.
Okay.
It is the state. And the state is necessary. We
All right,
know why it's.
so control is
so-
always sought. So does that mean that there will still be some kind of control of the black markets?
That is the interesting thing about the market. As much as control is always sought, and in this instance, I'm thinking about the state specifically, it's impossible to regulate the black market, and that's kind of the point.
Okay, so why are you trying to regulate the black market?
We're not.
That's okay.
That's
So what is your legalization?
the legalization is to stop what legal action is supposed to be right now, so it's the state
To
taking
make
negative
legal?
action.
And there's no regulations at all?
To revoke persecution and enforcement of marijuana prohibition.
So can they still kill people for no reason, like gratuitous violence?
Can the state,
Yeah.
if the state justifies it, like we can't be the state, but it
Okay,
takes
so you
away
do
more
nothing
ground.
through your legalization. Okay,
Right.
I'm sending it now.